To St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, now on BBC One, as members of the royal family make a personal tribute to the late Queen.
Good evening and welcome to this special programme, Scotland, the Vigil. Tonight, the Queen's 4 children will stand guard around their mother's coffin as it lies at rest in St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. Hundreds of people have already filed past the Queen's coffin since the doors were opened to the public a short time ago. Outside, so many people willing to wait however long they need to, and it could be many hours, so that they get their chance to say a personal farewell to the Queen. The King and his brothers and sister arrived at St Giles a short time ago and will be shortly taking their place around the Queen's coffin. Sally Magnuson is at St Giles.
And the King and the Princess Royal taking their places around the coffin, and their brothers on the other side, facing out beside the members of the Royal Company of Archers who have been guarding their mother's coffin. Amid all the rush and noise of their formal lives, this is a profoundly human time, as anyone who has stood by the coffin of a parent will know.
Majesty into the heart and hands of her God. May she rest in peace. May light perpetual shine upon her. God bless the Queen. God save the Queen.
And as the vigil comes to an end, the king and his three siblings walk down the nave of St Giles, where they came this afternoon for a very beautiful service to leave the cathedral. Smiling at last, King Charles, after what may have been a bit of an ordeal. At the end of a grueling day, sadness was etched on their faces as they stood vigil. Getting into their car, where they'll take the short journey back down the Royal Mile to the Palace of Holyrood House. After a very moving vigil, which was in a sense our vigil too. The King's, Queen's children had to do it in the full glare of the cameras, but it was perhaps a private moment for everyone.
Well, as the King and his brothers and sisters head back towards the Palace of Holyrood House, let's reflect on what we have just witnessed with the royal historian and biographer of Her Majesty the Queen, Robert Lacey, and also the former private secretary to the then Prince of Wales, Mark Leishman. And as Sally said, I mean, very difficult. I mean, in the full public glare, such a private moment for them.
Very, very difficult and very moving, and a whole series of things coming together in a week or 10 days when things are coming together just about every hour. And I think sitting here watching that, I think a lot of people who have lost their mother or who have lost their father will perhaps identify with the emotion and the feelings and the immense shift going on in their lives. Whilst everybody may not, of course, undertake that sort of a vigil, people will have had their own arrangements and their own moments with a departed parent, which after all is just about all of us.
But Robert Lacey, The monarchy, that is the monarchy, isn't it? It is very, very public. You are in the public eye for a lot of the time.
That's the essence of the job, as Mark would have known working with Prince Charles, that you are on constant display, and we've seen it all the time, but all today. And Prince Charles tried to, well, more than tried, he did put it into words, I thought, very movingly, speaking to the Scottish Parliament, as he's already spoken on television. But there we saw them. It was a public display of tribute to their mother, but it was also their own personal mourning. And I think people will have been moved by that, and I think the more people, who live close will be inspired to follow their example, perhaps.
Talk to us about the history of what we're seeing, because the public are now filing past the coffin in St Giles Cathedral. This has not happened very often, has it?
No, I mean, vigils, in the religious sense, of course, go back centuries. People stand vigil for a saint's day or a religious festival. So far as we know, in terms of royal ritual, the first precedent for this was in 1936, after the death of King George V, the Queen's grandfather, when his son Edward VIII, starting off so promisingly, he became notorious for abdicating and becoming the Duke of Windsor, but he had this brilliant idea that he and his three brothers, he himself, his next brother, Duke of York as he then was, who became George VI, Duke of Gloucester and the Duke of Kent, should in their military uniforms stand vigil very much as we've just seen it. And the Vigil of the Princes wasn't actually photographed. It is the subject of an oil painting that we presume to be accurate. As I remember the oil painting, it's just the princes. There are no other soldiers there. They took the place of the guards. And then the next vigil was for the Queen Mother, organised in 2002, organised by Prince Charles.
And that was the Vigil of the Princes, wasn't it? There was Prince Charles, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward and Lord Linley, the grandsons.
That's right.
What is very different today is that we have seen Princess Anne there, the Princess Royal, which I think is the first time a woman has ever stood vigil around a monarch's coffin in history, isn't it?
So far as I know, it is. Yes, I'd say it definitely is, and obviously a sign of times changing.
And Princess Anne, Mark, let's talk about her role at the moment, because she has been by her mother's side since she was at Balmoral, since she passed away at Balmoral, and she is really staying with her mother all the way through this journey, isn't she? Right the way to London.
Indeed, and of course, it's only Monday, and here we are, we're in Edinburgh, and as things move towards London, you get the sense of that kind of building of a national mood, I suppose. And as we've heard a bit today, when people actually see the hearse and they see the coffin for the first time, no amount of practice or rehearsal or forecasting can make any real difference until you see it in front of you. And I think it's an extraordinary thing that the Princess Royal, who, of course, with other members of the family, work incredibly hard. The Princess Royal, by her mother's side, it carries a particular poignancy, I think. And we saw her outside just at the gates of Holyrood House yesterday with the arrival of the coffin. And there's a kind of, I don't know, a sort of synchronicity or something that kind of works. But as you say, these are very, very, I think we've heard the word grueling. These are grueling hours and grueling days. And it's very important that in all of these moments to find little moments of self-retreat, nourishment, call it what you like, because the duty is profound and demanding. But of course, that's what duty is, it's what monarchy is.
The first glimpse we got of you'd expect the Queen to be close to her daughter, as of course to her sons. I thought the first charmingly human indication we got of the closeness between mother and daughter happened during COVID. do you remember was an occasion during COVID when the Queen wanted to pay tribute to some nurses, and it had to be virtual with the Queen's own iPad. That's when we discovered the Queen had an iPad that she used. And Princess Anne was doing it, and the Queen was having trouble getting online. And Princess Anne, with her slightly famous irritability, said, "Oh, come along, Mummy, press the right buttons." But it was, it's a charming example of the closeness at the heart of the family. So, yes, those are presumably the sort of memories that are particularly going through her head.
And it is such a private time for the family as well, isn't it? And we've got some wonderful archive footage of the Queen. It was filmed when she was 42 years old with her children. There it is, children, very young Prince Edward there. You can't forget that this is a very intensely private, personal moment for the family, but it is being played out in such a full glare of publicity going right around the world.
Yes, yes, exactly. But in a way, that is an essential part of what modern monarchy is. If monarchy is about anything one cares to name, then connection is vital. And when people see and feel, one doesn't have to be a kind of an emotional or even a kind of huge rabid supporter of the institution, but what one does have to understand are the relationships. And I think that's what members of the royal family truly understand. And therefore, if we were sitting here and it was all going on behind closed doors and we hadn't the faintest idea what was going on, let alone seeing anybody, then that really begins to grate. Despite the fact, of course, as you say rightly, these are private moments as well as intensely public moments.
Now, I think we can see by the crowds, the number of people who are filing past the Queen's coffin right now, the connection that people feel with the Queen, their desire to be there. People are waiting outside in the street, and they will have to wait a long time. There could be many hours before they can get there and file past the Queen's coffin. Kirsty Walk is outside the cathedral and joins us now. Kirsty.
Sophie, it's been a day of so many emotions: respect, dignity, fondness and loss. As you say, people filing past the coffin thinking, as Sally Magnuson said, of their own families. And then that incredibly moving moment where the Queen's 4 children came in and took their places around the coffin. And with me are 3 people who were witness to that. Stuart, who is from Dalgety Bay, very near Edinburgh, and Gaynor and Paul, who are from Cornwall. That will be a time, that small, precious moment of time, that you'll never forget. Yeah. What was it like to stand there watching the members of the royal family with such dignity and peace?
I think it was like I said to the other lady, it's like being a part of a respectful togetherness, being with them in their grief, and yet they're holding, and it's sort of the continuity that went on with that, but actually being part of their family moment was very moving for me, and I'm so glad to be here.
For you?
I think it was very much the private grief part that I felt, entering into a sort of a quite sombre area and feeling the grief that they were all feeling and being a part of that.
I think for many people they will be surprised that ordinary members of the public were in there at that time, but it says something in a way about this time in this monarchy's life that, Stuart, it was for the public as well. It was something they were sharing.
Yeah, it was remarkably poignant. Just be able to share that moment, hear the prayers, and just feel the emotion of the situation. It was, yeah. I hadn't felt the emotion hit me until I walked in there. And
had you always planned to come to the vigil?
No, I hadn't actually. I came yesterday, I watched the cortege come through the city, and today I just took the opportunity to come and spend some time.
And it's extraordinary because, you know, we now know that there's at least 20,000 people going back more than a mile, and these people will be happy, as it were, to stay overnight, because this is something that is going to be forever in their memories. Whatever they feel about the monarchy is a moment of history. What will you take back to Cornwall from this time you've spent here at this moment? We see there's so many people filing out. What will you take back from it?
I think it's being part of something bigger than me, big as a nation, really, and the Queen was part of all of our lives, most of our life, well, all my life, and the same with most of the people here. It's that common togetherness for somebody who was very special.
When I was talking to people today, and I said, what was your overriding sentiment? And one said, or several said, it was her constancy.
Yes, and her faithfulness and her selflessness and her faith for me, because we're on a pilgrimage walk, and it was about, for me, her faith that underpinned everything, and gave her that life of service.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you want to go and reflect on it further.
Thank you.
Sophie, so many people here filing through. You know, it's dark now and people are very respectful and very quiet.
Amazing pictures of the crowds, Kirsty, filing past and waiting in the street. People have flown in from all around the world, haven't they?
There are people here from all around the world, people that have come in, but people who are in Edinburgh at this time of year who wanted to, as it were, see history in the making, see what, you know, the Queen's relationship to Scotland has been like. And I think what's happened over the last few days is more and more people have understood how much the Queen, of course, who is half Scottish, felt that this was her home. She wasn't coming to visit, she was coming home. Whether she was coming to Balmoral, whether she was coming to the Palace of Holyrood House, there was a certain feeling, I think, that this was the place where she felt at home, could relax, and just be, in a way, more ordinary than anywhere else.
Kirsty, for now, thank you. Well, as the King and his siblings left their mother's side a short time ago, they were relieved at the Vigil by a ceremonial unit that serves as the Sovereign's bodyguard in Scotland, the Royal Company of Archers. It's a role they have performed since 1822, so it seems appropriate that in their bicentennial year, they are able to be by the Queen's side one final time.
The Royal Company of Archers, the Queen's bodyguard for Scotland.
The Royal Company of Archers was set up as an archery club, formally set up in 1676. And then in 1822, when King George IV came to Scotland in the grand visit to Edinburgh, we were given the honour of being his personal bodyguard for Scotland. We have approximately 400 members, active members, and we have about 180 non-active members who are unable to be on parade because of their age as part of the organisation. During the course of the year, we will do any number of ceremonial activities whenever the Sovereign is on formal ceremonial duty. We will conduct activities in support of the monarch when there is installation of new members of the Order of the Thistle, at the garden party, or indeed at investiture. Her Majesty clearly enjoyed meeting her subjects in Scotland, and I think it meant a lot to her.
I always felt that she had an affinity to us, and that was why, when we asked if she would sit for yet another portrait, she so graciously agreed to do so, and the wonderful painting of her by Nicky Phillips hangs in Archers Hall and is treasured by us. I think it wouldn't be exaggerating to say that she was quite fond of the Royal Company of Archers. She'd lived her whole life surrounded by the most professional and disciplined of soldiers, and the Royal Company wasn't the Brigade of Guards. A lot of them, including myself, had never been in the services, and therefore it was quite something to turn out on parade. And of course, not everything went exactly to plan. And I think I'm right in saying both the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh had the occasional smile on their faces, but they were smiles of kindness and understanding, I think, rather than of disappointment.
In my experience, those members who have been invited to join the company have a sense of duty about being a part of that bodyguard. Now, whilst of course it's only ceremonial, the point is that for the ceremony and for the heritage and for the character of Scotland, these individuals are playing a very important part, and they feel deeply the honour of being in that position. We will be providing a vigil to protect the Queen as she lies in St Giles Cathedral. Being able to mark something that will be recorded in history is extraordinary. I think something that we will all remember for the rest of our lives.
I think that is very true. The King spoke today about the weight of history, and it really does feel like that. It has felt like that for the last few days, hasn't it? We're seeing these traditions, the pageantry that just stretch back centuries.
Yes, and the repetition and echoes of the earlier vigils increases that. It has been so interesting how when people have been asked outside Buckingham Palace or here in Scotland, well, why have you come? History is the answer, often the answer. I wanted to be there, I wanted to show my feelings, but so often, and why have you brought your children? Because I wanted them to feel part of history, and of course, with all due respect to our darling politicians who come and go, it is actually the longer-lived monarchs whose lives actually probably convey history with more weight to most people.
And Mark Leishman, you know, I was going to call him Prince Charles, the King, King Charles. You know him very well. You worked for him for a long time when he was Prince. How do you think he will be coping with this tumultuous change? He knew it was coming, but still, when it happens.
Well, the King, like other members of the family, of course, have this terrific sense of duty. And when one thinks about, as you say, the Prince of Wales, when I was working there, having learned so much at the knee of both his mother and his grandmother, of course. And I think there's this kind of extraordinary energy which is remarkable to observe. And it's driven, I think, by this kind of insatiable curiosity about people, about places, about things, about events, but also about tying, just as you said, Sophie, these threads of history, these golden threads. And in fact, Kirsty mentioned it a short time ago. I mean, we've just been witnessing this extraordinary vigil in St Giles. Well, in 1588, John Knox turned up, you know, and transformed a lot, or attempted to. And the whole balance of history shifted in terms of religious worship. The Royal Mile in Edinburgh has been used as a place of processing for kings and queens for 500 years. And here we are in the digital age, sitting in a television studio, remarking on these things in probably similar ways to which people have done in previous centuries. But I think that point about energy is an interesting theme for the family as a whole. In 2012, in the Diamond Jubilee, I was standing a few feet away from both the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. And you remember going down the Thames, and the weather just got worse and worse and worse. Well, I counted, and they were there for 4.5 hours. And for 20 minutes, they went downstairs and had a cup of tea, and then came back up again. I couldn't believe it. You know, and the rest of us kind of saying, how long is this going? You know, but they were there right to the end. And it's just, I quote it as an example of that extraordinary devotion, the energy, the commitment, because as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think if there isn't connection, there isn't a great deal. But as long as there is connection and real things happening, that makes a great difference. I was lucky enough to see Her Majesty in Windsor about 3 months ago. The Royal Warrant Holders Association, of which I'm director, had gifted Her Majesty for the Platinum Jubilee a new processional cross. And at the age of 96, she came into the room, and that smile that people have talked about, the engagement was frankly stunning. And you're never sycophantic. You never, ever do that. I'm just observing what I saw and heard at the time. And almost immediately, she was interested in the artisan skills that had gone into making this processional cross. And there we are, you know, at the age of 96, 3 months ago, in the same way that her son, her other sons, and the Princess Royal would, I think, be saying exactly the same thing.
Well, we're looking at those images of people filing into St Giles Cathedral, but there will be another group of people standing vigil around the Queen's coffin tomorrow, a group who are very much steeped in Scotland's history. They are called the most ancient and most noble Order of the Thistle, and there are only 16 members. They must have been born in Scotland. It's a chivalric order that has its spiritual home inside St Giles Cathedral. There's a small, fabulously ornate chapel in its southeast corner where the order's knights and ladies Among them, Scotland's most eminent physicians, politicians and captains of industry would meet Her Majesty. And as you are about to see, being part of it was one of the highest honours the Queen could have bestowed on them.
The Order of the Thistle is the second senior order of chivalry in the United Kingdom, the only one that is exclusive to Scots, and is very much in the personal gift of the sovereign. It is not part of the political honours system.
I was completely taken aback, and I remember it came here. I left the letter open on the table, and my wife came back and saw the letter, and she said, "For once, even I am impressed."
If you look through the history, it is the main nobility who are members of the Order of the Thistle. But during the Queen's reign, she changed that. You know, people without any other honours, without anything else to their name, were made members of the Thistle, and she appointed the very first woman to be an ordinary member, Lady Marian Fraser. So the Queen put her mark very clearly on the order as being something that had to do with modern Scotland and not simply the past. I didn't know, first of all, when I was invited to be here, that part of it is that you have a private audience with Her Majesty. It was an experience I will never forget. What impressed me most, that she was extremely well briefed about me. She knew exactly when I came to this country, where I had studied medicine and what I had done, and the conversation was very easy.
You're actually 15 to 20 minutes alone. No faithful retainer, no one else there, just the two of you. I had to pinch myself, you know, it's just amazing, but totally relaxing.
On reflection, that was probably the best time or the best half an hour of my life. Although I always had a great respect and admiration for her, that's the time I think I realized that this is a very special person.
The principal event would be the summer installation or commemoration service. That happens normally every 2 years. Every winter, however, at St Andrew's Tide, the members of the order gather here in the chapel for a small, short service, so they all meet at least once a year. All services of the order were always passed before her before they were approved. Nothing passed her eye without taking note of it, as it were. Yes, you had to look at detail and make sure you were right, but it was enjoyable to do it because you knew you were doing it for somebody who appreciated what was done and wanted to be involved.
It wasn't a formality, it wasn't going through the motions. There was something inherently important about the order that was very significant to the Queen. And I think she regarded that as being a very important part of the fabric of the United Kingdom and one of the most important parts of the fabric of Scotland.
And you can see what it all meant to them. Something we've just discovered watching that film. So Mark, your grandfather was a Knight of the Order of the Thistle. You were there.
I was, Sophie, at the age of 6. Processing across just across the little courtyard we've just seen with Her Majesty and other members of the family. And yes, it was a few minutes, and I was holding Lord Reith's robes as a small boy in a kilt. And I think I remember bits of it quite well, but by the age of 7, I think I was ready to retire.
Lord Reith, just to make clear, the Lord Reith, the first Director General of the BBC, as well. A lot of history we're uncovering here. Yeah. Robert Lacey, just as we draw to a close and we see the images of these people filing past the Queen's coffin this evening, the beginning of many days of this, there is not just a huge change for the royal family themselves, but also for the nation. I mean, it's seismic change for the nation, for the United Kingdom.
The change, you mean, from the Queen to Prince Charles, something we've taken for granted. So many people have said the only monarch they remember is the Queen. And Yes, it is, but what I think is encouraging is that we've already heard in what Prince Charles has said that he's got plans for the future. I mean, he knows the causes he wants to pursue, but he's already said that if people thought him divisive in the past, that is not his intention in the future, and that he sees his role now, which of course is such an important role as you're suggesting at this particular moment, although I think almost at any moment in a nation's history, there can never be too much pulling together, never be too much togetherness.
But when you think what has happened just in the last 7 days, Boris Johnson was Prime Minister this time last week.
And he was seeing the Queen herself,
The
smiling
next day.
there.
Mm.
And the Queen was doing her job. I mean, it's not a week ago, last Tuesday, and then 2 days later, she's not with us anymore. So it's a lot for everybody to take in. And of course, one function of these rituals, as Mark has been saying, is to actually provide means for us to process, either by participating or by participating through television in these rituals, which are in fact designed to channel our emotions in positive and creative ways, so that we can understand what is happening and yes, I mean, experience the sorrow, but also the thrill and of history in which we are living.
The weight of history, and it is unfolding in front of our eyes all the time at the moment. Thank you both very much for joining me this evening. Well, the public will file past and continue to file past the coffin overnight, and if you want to watch it, the pictures are being broadcast live on iPlayer, or you can press the red button on your handset. The Queen's coffin remains at St Giles Cathedral until 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, when it will be driven to Edinburgh Airport. The flight takes off at 6 o'clock. The Princess Royal will be on board. She is staying with her mother on this long journey south. They land at RAF Northolt just outside London at 7 tomorrow evening before travelling to Buckingham Palace, where the Queen will spend one more night before her coffin is taken to Westminster Hall on Wednesday, where she will lie in state. It is hard to imagine the scale of what is to come, the crowds that we will see over the next week. But judging by the scenes today, it will be of a magnitude that we will only witness once in our lifetime, as Britain's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, is laid to rest. Goodbye.